Good morning, families, friends, residents, and guests of the Grand, and most importantly, to the family and friends of those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice to this nation. Honored veterans and families of the Korean and Vietnam era veterans. We're here today to honor our heroes, to remember their achievements, their courage, and their dedication, and to say thank you for their sacrifices. Thinking of the heroes who join us in this group today, and those who are here in spirit, a person can't help but feel awed by the enormity of what we encounter. We stand amid patriots and the families and friends of those who have nobly served. Many of them didn't ask to leave their homes to fight on distant battlefields. Many didn't even volunteer. They didn't go to war because they loved fighting. They were called to be part of something bigger than themselves. They were ordinary people who responded to extraordinary ways in extreme times. They rose to the nation's call because they wanted to protect a nation which has given them and us so much. Millions of Americans have fought and died in battlefields here and abroad to defend our freedoms and way of life. Today, our troops continue to make the ultimate sacrifices. And even as we lose troops, more Americans step forward to say, I'm ready to serve. They follow in the footsteps of generations of fine Americans. The first formal Memorial Day observance was in Waterloo, New York on May 5th, 1866. Congress officially recognized Memorial Day as a federal holiday in 1887. Since then, with each passing year and subsequent conflicts, we have continued to honor our troops. We have awarded medals to many soldiers, added their names to monuments, and named buildings for them, to honor them for their bravery, but nothing can ever replace the hole left behind by a fallen service member. And no number of medals or ribbons can comfort the ones left behind. On the evening of November 27, 1950, Chinese Communist forces launched a massive attack against the United States and United Nations troops stationed in the Chosin Valley Reservoir area in northeast Northern Korea, resulting in a 17-day conflict that became known as the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. At the time of the initial Chinese attack, members of the United States Army's 31st and 32nd Infantry Regiments were defending the area north of Shinhong-ni on the east side of the reservoir. The defenders were overwhelmed by the numerically superior Chinese forces, and on December 1st were forced to withdraw to friendly lines at Hagu-ru-i. Chinese roadblocks from Shinhong-ni and Hagu-ru, along with the constant enemy fire from the surrounding high ground, made the withdrawal route extremely dangerous. Eventually, the column was broken into separate segments, which the Chinese attacked individually. Many men were lost or captured during the battle, with survivors reaching friendly lines at Hagu-ru on December 2nd and the 3rd. First Lieutenant Robert Gerard Schmidt entered the United States Army from North Dakota and was a member of Mike Company, 3rd Battalion, 31st Infantry, 7th Infantry Division. On December 1st, 1950, he was killed while fighting at the base of Hill 1221 during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. His remains were not recovered at the time of his loss, and he remains unaccounted for. Today, First Lieutenant Schmidt is memorialized on the corpse of the missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, located in Honolulu, Hawaii. His name is also inscribed on the Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. We are honored and privileged to have with us today Miss Joan Morris, a resident of the Grand and the niece of First Lieutenant Gerard Schmidt. Her uncle, who served with great courage during the Korean War, is still missing in action to this day. His remains have not been recovered and he has not returned home. In memory and honor of those who sacrificed so much, Joan and Mr. Kevin Sartor, the mayor of Surprise, will now lay a wreath at the base of the U.S. and POW MIA flagpole. Please join us in a moment of respect and remembrance. Please stand for the raising of the U.S. flag and remain standing for the national anthem.
Everyone. The family of Lieutenant Schmidt provided us 2 letters that we are allowed to read to you today. These 2 letters are going to tell the story of who Bobby was back on the farm by a little girl who was a child when he was growing up on the farm. The second letter is a letter written to Bobby's mother from a fellow soldier that was in that battle with him at the Chosin Reservoir, and his name was Lieutenant Henry Tradeck. Memorial Day commemorates men and women who have died while in military service. When I've been asked to speak at Memorial Day events, I share memories of my childhood idol, Lieutenant Robert Bobby Schmidt, who died valiantly in North Korea on December 1st, 1950. Bobby's family lived on a farm near ours in North Dakota, where his mother, Caroline, raised chickens and sheep. His father, Ed, had been a grain buyer, but because of disabilities from World War I, he was no longer able to work. Bobby's 2 sisters were teachers living elsewhere, but they occasionally returned home to visit. Bobby returned from World War II and resumed his education. He graduated from North Dakota State University and was commissioned as a lieutenant after completing his reserve officers training course. He was uncommonly handsome and had Caroline's warm blue eyes and wavy brown hair. My brother and I were just starting elementary school, and we saw Bobby and his fiancée, Miss Joan, along with the rest of the Schmidt family, as role models. Their kindness and friendship were sincere, and they took an interest in us as worthy human beings. We loved visiting them at their farm. Bobby did not receive his Army orders right away, so he worked for my dad on our farm. No matter what the job entailed, plowing, picking rocks from the fields, hauling manure, Bobby cheerfully completed the task. Then one day, Bobby learned he was going to Korea. He worked on our farm was ending. Always a sentimentalist, my dad nailed Bobby's work gloves to the fence post and said, "Bobby, your gloves will be right here when you return." There was no way for us to know we would never see Bobby again. Bobby's life as a soldier was one of extreme hardships. The winter in North Korea was bitterly cold, and the troops suffered from frostbite. Their K rations and the water in their canteens froze. All they had to keep them warm in the foxholes at night was a single blanket. Bobby's family learned about his bravery on the battlefield near the Chosin Reservoir after his death. Although he had been shot in both legs, had 16 bullet holes in his coat, and had his arm in a sling from another wound, he refused to ride in a vehicle with the wounded. Instead, he resolutely led his troops up a hill along the border of North Korea shares with China, where they faced enemy fire from Chinese soldiers who greatly outnumbered them. Using a stick for a crutch so that he could walk, Bobby encouraged his men in his platoon every step of the way. He gave his rifle to one of the soldiers who had lost his gun. Bobby's charges, not noting his valor and inspiring leadership, kept right on moving up the hill known as Hill 1221. When their leader was mortally wounded by a machine gun bullet, even then Bobby refused medical treatment and urged his troops on. They responded by fighting with such ferocity that they were able to take the hill. All of this was noted in Bobby's posthumous Distinguished Service Cross. Back home, the Smith family was devastated. Bobby, who kept such promise, was sacrificed. He and Miss Joan would never marry and have that batch of children they had planned to have. Years went by. Bobby's grieving parents died without ever having his remains returned to them. And Bobby's gloves, nailed to the fence post, they remained just where my dad put them until the wind and the rain and the snow decomposed them. And they disappeared into the world beyond, just as our hero had. The gloves became a special part of our vast store of remembrances of our departed friend. Let the memories of those who have died in our armed services live on and be an inspiration for us. Brave women and men like Bobby set high standards to emulate. We cannot let the odds overcome us. No matter how difficult things may be, we must resolve to overcome adversity and move forward. There are nearly 300 fellow soldiers still missing from that 17-day conflict. The Korean War was known as the Forgotten War. To Bobby's family and all the other families waiting for their loved ones to return, all of us here today will never forget Robert, Bobby Schmidt, and we will continue to pray for their return, and we will never forget their service to our country. The second letter, written by one of Bobby's fellow officers, in response to a letter Bobby's mother, Caroline, wrote to him. We do not know what Caroline's letter stated, but hear the words of Bobby's friend to his mother, Caroline. This letter was written on February 6th of 1951. The lieutenant was in a hotel in Japan. He was on the R&R. My dear Miss Schmidt, I received your letter several days ago. I was away when it came, and I didn't know how to go about answering it. So I let it lay there for a while without doing anything at all about it. I would first like to say that you should be very proud to have raised a boy as fine as Bob was. I have never in my life met a man of better character. He loved his family dearly. He always talked of his mother, his two wonderful sisters, and his father. I considered it a privilege to be a very close friend of his and can say he has helped me to be a much better man. Now to tell you what I know of Bob. I was with him on Thanksgiving Day when he last wrote Joan, so I'll go from there to keep you up to date. When he wrote that last letter, we had just left the Tucson Reservoir and we were back for a few days' rest. The following day, November 25th, we took a trip into a large city called Puchan. We rode all day to get there, arriving late at night, so he could not write. On the 26th, we left Puchan at dawn and rode all day to Hamburg. Got there late at night, so again, he could not write. While there, an Army friend of ours gave us both brand new field coats, as it was very cold at this time. The following morning at dawn, November 27th, we left Hamburg and went northwest. We relieved the Marines on the northern part of the chosen reservoir late in the afternoon of the 27th. We spent the rest of the day digging in our new position. The Marines pulled out to the southern tip of the reservoir, 912 miles south. The following morning, November 28th, at about 3:30 a.m., we woke to hear lots of shooting, whistles blowing, and the bugle calling. From that moment on, we fought without letting up. Bob had been sleeping 30 feet away from me, but I didn't see him all that day, as the Chinese were all over the area. There were thousands of them. We only had our own battalion and 3 batteries of field artillery up there that day. He learned that day that we were completely cut off and surrounded. I had a small area that I was defending with a small group of men, and that night a part of M Company, which is a machine gun company. Bob's company fell back, that area I had. They brought all their wounded back, and Bob was one of the wounded. He was shot through both legs, but he would never lie down for long. He kept helping us out by encouraging the men to keep on shooting. He had some very close calls, and I compared the number of bullet holes we had in our new field coats. I had also been hit with a mortar shell and had 8 fragments in me. Bob had 16 bullet holes in his new coat, and I have 35. Mine were mortar holes, his were bullet holes. We were joking about that, and that we both had $1 million wounds, the kind you can go back to the hospital with and take a long rest. Then Bob and I fought side by side all night on the 28th, all day November 29th, all night on the 29th, and all day on the 30th, and all night on the 30th. We were cut off from all outside help all this time. We were out of ammunition. We were out of food. We had not slept during all this time. So on the morning of December 1st, it was decided we would make a breakout and try to fight our way back to the Marines, who were 12 miles away south. We loaded all the wounded into trucks. All the rest got in a formation to fight the trucks out. Bob refused to ride. He stayed with the fighting group even though he couldn't hardly walk. He is a very brave man. We got to a very bad roadblock that required much fighting. A group of men had to take a hill that had hundreds of on it. Bob went up this hill like a man. My legs were too weak to make it, but I tried because I was still walking. That day, they took the hill and I went around it. Bob never came down the hill. I then got shot again in my heel. We lost almost all our battalion at the hill. We never did get the truckloads with wounded out and had to leave them to the mercy of the Chinks. I did not get out of there for 3 more days and nights of walking and fighting. I did not see Bob again after he went up the hill, so I can't say what happened to him. God was very good to me to get me out of there, as I could not have gotten out alone. Well, Miss Schmidt, I hope you can make heads and tails of this. It may sound a bit sketchy, but I had to even think of what happened up there, as they sound unbelievable. I also hate to appear blunt, but I think you want to know exactly what happened. If I can answer any questions, please call me, as I think an awful lot about Bob and everything connected with him. I think of him as a brother. I'll close for now with all my respect to you, your friend, Henry. We are unable to welcome Bobby home today, but the last time that the North Korean had given over remains of soldiers, there were 288 boxes. In those boxes, there was 350 to 400 remains. They are still trying to identify. We will watch for Bobby's name to appear, that he has finally come home. And then we will all welcome Lieutenant Robert Bobby Schmidt back home. Thank you. At this time, the CAM General Manager, Mr. Jeff Hoffman, will present Joan with a Korean War commemorative coin. Today, we are also here to remember and honor the Americans who fought for freedom in Korea in 1950. Our nation was weary of war, but 1.5 million Americans left their families and friends and their homes to help defend freedom for a determined ally halfway around the world. Together with men and women from 20 other nations, some who are represented here today, they joined the first mission of the United Nations to preserve peace by fighting shoulder to shoulder with the brave people of South Korea to defend their independence, to safeguard other Asian nations from attack, and to protect the freedom that remains our greatest gift. The Korean War veterans endured terrible hardships, deathly cold, weeks and months crammed in foxholes and bunkers, and enemy overwhelming numbers, the threat of brutal imprisonment and torture, defending the perimeter at Pusan, braving the tides at Incheon, confronting the world's fastest fighter jets in Mig Alley, enduring hand-to-hand combat on Heartbreak Ridge and Port Chop Hill, fighting the way back from the Chosin Reservoir. They set a standard of courage that may be equal, but will never be surpassed in any annals of American combat. Tens of thousands of Americans died in Korea. Our South Korea allies lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians. Our other United Nations allies suffered grievous casualties. Thousands of Americans were lost in Korea to this day and have never been accounted for. On July 27, 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower called the end of the hostilities and armistice on a single battleground. Not peace in the world. It's fair to say that when the guns fell silent then, no one knew for sure what our forces in Korea had done for the future of our nation or the future of the world freedom. The larger conflict of the Cold War had only begun. It would take 4 decades more to win. In a struggle so long and consuming, perhaps it's not surprising that too many lost sight of the importance of Korea. But now we know, with the benefit of history, that those of you who served and the families who stood behind you laid the foundations for one of the greatest triumphs in the history of human freedom by sending a clear message that America had not defeated fascism. To see communism prevail, you put the free world on the road to victory in the Cold War. That is your enduring contribution, and all free people everywhere should recognize it today. So to all the veterans here today, and to all throughout our land who are watching, let us all say, when darkness threatens, you kept the torch of light, liberty alight. You kept the flame burning so others across the world could share it. You showed the truth that freedom is not free. We honor, thank you very much. We honor you today because you did answer the call to defend a country you never knew and the people you never met. And the world is better because of you. We will now honor a few Korean War veterans from our community. Mr. Avery Aronovich is escorted by Barry Crusadin.
I found my place. It's an honor for me to welcome Mr. Avery Aronovich, a Korean War veteran. Avery is the son of Jack and Prima Aronovich, and he lived in Montreal, Canada. Avery's father managed a clothing factory, and his mother was a homemaker. Jack Aronovich was a bomber pilot during World War II, so he understood the importance of supporting the war effort on the home front. When asked to convert his clothing factory to make uniforms for the military, he didn't hesitate at all. Prima, in her younger years, was a Revlon model in Canada. Prima also received her high school diploma at the age of 93. Besides Avery, the couple had another son and daughter. Avery's brother served the United States Air Force during the Berlin airlift. Now let's spend some time talking about another hero from the family. Avery enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force to be a tail gunner. He completed his training and was prepared to support not only his countrymen, but the countrymen from the 12 countries within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, to fight against the global threat of communism. Once Avery arrived in Kimpo Air Base, the Canadians were flying the U.S. F-86s, and there was no need for a tail gunner. Avery was taught to ride motorcycles from the age of 11. So when he was asked to become a motorcycle dispatch rider during the Korean War, he, like his father, didn't hesitate. Motorcycle dispatch riders were used in World War I, World War II, and during this conflict as well. The riders were used for delivering urgent orders and messages between headquarters and the units on the front line. Avery rode a Royal Enfield 125 motorcycle, not very fast, and understood he had a vital role at a time when telecommunications were limited and insecure. Avery was injured when a motor round landed near him while he was performing his duties. He was sent to a veterans hospital in Japan, and when he was well enough to travel, he had returned to Canada. When Avery had finished his military commitment and started the next chapter of his life, he wanted to become a cowboy, so he moved to Florida. Avery saw an ad in the local paper for ranch hands, so he showed up and asked if he could ride a horse. They asked if he could ride a horse. He said yes, and his cowboy story began. He competed in rodeos and even drove cattle cars for a couple of years. He was at a local Western benefit dance when he was asked to dance by a young lady, and the rest is history. The couple had a son. He also followed in the family footsteps was in the United States Army Rangers. Before the interview began, Avery said he did not have any funny experiences to share. So the interviewer reminded him of a comment he had made as a dispatch rider unofficially. He was also told he was a moving target practice for the North Korean snipers. When he was trying to get a job as a ranch hand, he didn't know how to ride a horse. He lied about knowing how to ride that horse. But he recalled the sad experience of loading wounded onto aircraft for their flights home, only to end up being one of those wounded. He also volunteered to take guard duty for the soldiers during Christmas. The Korean War was known as the Forgotten War, and all of us here today will never forget, and never forget you and your family's service and sacrifice to your country and ours. Thank you so much.
We are honored to have Mr. Joseph Morrison, escorted by Paul Hein, a Korean War veteran.
Please welcome Mr. Joseph Morrison, a Korean and Vietnam War veteran. Joe was the son of William and Mary Morrison, and they lived in McVeetown, Pennsylvania. Joe's father was a steel worker and served in the military in the 1920s. His mother was a homemaker, and she was very busy with 8 children. Joe recalled the Depression of the 1930s and when his father lost their home. Joe recalled the Depression of the 1930s, and Joe and his siblings walked to school every day in a one-room schoolhouse. As there was little to no opportunity for Joe, he enlisted in the Air Corps, in the Army Air Corps, at the age of 17 in 1945. This was the 7th Air Force, 12th Tactical Command. His basic training was at Kessler Field, Mississippi, and then Scottsfield, Illinois for air traffic control. When he finished training, he was sent to Lahore, France, Camp Philip Morris, to Munich, and then to Dachau, Germany. The port of Lahore, France was littered with the remains of sunken ships, as well as most of Germany was destroyed. Joe spent 3 years in Germany, helping to restore order during the initial occupation of Germany. While in Germany, the United States Air Force was established, and when Joe returned home from Germany, the only assignment available for the United States Air Force was in Guam. So he decided to re-enlist in the United States Army. Looking back, maybe that was a mistake for him. He soon found himself assigned to an infantry division at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Joe was then sent to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and from there sent to the Korean War in May of 1952. There, he was assigned to the 35th Infantry Regiment Combat Team, 25th Infantry Division, where he served in combat until June of 1953. Upon return from Korea, Joe was awarded the Combat Infantry Badge and the Bronze Star, as well as many other awards and ribbons. The 35th Infantry Regiment was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation and 3 Republic of Korea Presidential Unit Citations. Returning from the war, Joe continued to serve in the Army in many different parts of the world, from supplying the Defense Early Warning System in Thule, Greenland during the Cold War with Russia, to the Baffin Islands, Gander, Newfoundland, and many other stations in the United States and abroad. Joe was sent to Vietnam in August of 1966 or 1967, where he received a 4 Bronze Star Service Medal. He returned to the United States and was stationed at McChord Air Base in Washington State. After 1 year, he was placed in orders again to return to Vietnam, so Joe decided to retire in November 1968 after 23 years of service. Employment prospects were non-existent. His first job back after retirement required him to beg for the job and working for free for 2 weeks to prove that he was stable and could do the work. After a year, he was hired by Lockheed Aircraft Company out of Luke Air Force Base. Joe retired from Lockheed and successfully started his own company, Custom Rifle Company. He built custom rifles and shotguns until the economic slowdown of the 1980s. Then he closed his business and fully retired. Through his arduous journey across the globe while serving his country, Joe found the love of his life with Dory, and they have 2 sons, Rick and Jeffrey. The Korean War was known as the Forgotten War, and the words "Welcome home" from the Vietnam War was never music to their ears. Joe, all of us here today will never forget you, and never forget your service to our country, and welcome home. We now welcome Mr. Lawrence D. Foy, escorted by Tina Hine.
Please welcome Mr. Larry Four, a Korean War veteran. Larry is the son of Francis and Margaret Foy, and they lived in St. Louis, Missouri on the Hill, or the Italian Hood, depending on who you ask. Larry's father managed a clothing factory, and his mother was a homemaker. She was very busy with 6 children, 1 daughter and 5 sons. All 5 sons served in the armed forces. But today, it is all about Larry. Larry was drafted into the Army in 1953 at the young age of 21. He believed he was going to save the world. He completed his training in field artillery at Camp Chaffee outside of Fort Smith, Arkansas. Fort Chaffee was the original home of the U.S. Army Training Center Field Artillery. A small note, a famous guy named Elvis Presley was also at Fort Chaffee. Upon completion of basic and forward observer training, which is a critical role in the military and is responsible for directing artillery and air support to the troops in the battlefield, Larry was shipped to Seattle, Washington, where he and his fellow soldiers were loaded on a ship and headed to South Korea. Once landing in South Korea, Larry was sent to the front lines, what we know as the DMZ. Assigned to the 555th, otherwise known as Triple Nickel, Field Artillery Battalion, known as Triple Nickel, sorry. He spent most of his time in bunkers with a gunner and a driver coordinating fire support. gathering intelligence on the battlefield, and critical to his job was to remain hidden from the enemy and to avoid detection. After World War II, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed. At this time of the North Korean War, there were 16 countries that were founded members. Larry and his gunner and driver found themselves supporting not only the United States military forces, but the bunker team was assigned forward absorber duties for infantry forces from Greece, Belgium, and France. Larry returned from the war and now processed out of Colorado. He found himself on the train, headed back home. He got married and went to work for a fire insurance rating bureau. He and his wife had 3 children, but none followed in his footsteps into the military. Larry always desired to grow professionally, so he moved into the water industry, working for the American Water Works, a public utility company. He remained with this company for 32 years before retiring. Larry was asked to share something about his experience in the war. He told the interviewer that Greek soldiers would allow his team to eat in their chow hall, but had strict health regulations. Entering the chow line, you had to dip your canteen cup in a pot of salt water to rinse out your mouth before eating. Larry stated everyone was dipping the same cup into the water. Their food was great, especially the pasta. On the flight back to the U.S. from the war, Larry's commander was passing out mail to the troops. Mail was always a highlight of combat. Hearing about loved ones, the words of support, love, and missing their soldiers so far away. Larry didn't get any mail from his family on that flight, but what he did get was 9 letters from a 6th grade class in Phoenix, Arizona. He was so touched by the letters he wrote back to every student. Remember when Larry said he was going to save the world when he was drafted? Well, he told his grandchildren that he arrived in June and the war ended in July. So he did save the world. The Korean War, again, was known as the Forgotten War. Larry, all of us here today will never forget you and never forget your service to our country. At this time, the camp general manager, Mr. Jeff Hoffman, will present each honored person with a Korean War commemorative coin.
Today we honor those who served in the Vietnam War, whose bravery and sacrifice shaped a generation. Their stories need telling, their memories saved for future Americans to understand and value. These veterans came from every state, every background, every part of life. They answered their nation's call right away, leaving behind families, careers, and comfortable lives. Their service shows the highest forms of American duty and sacrifice. Young soldiers learned hard lessons in faraway jungles. They met danger daily, trusted each other completely, and grew up fast under fire. The friendships made in combat lasted lifetimes, creating bonds stronger than blood. Those who returned brought back experiences that changed them forever. Some carry physical scars, others emotional wounds that time alone cannot fix. Yet they kept going, building their lives and helping their communities despite their burdens. Medical personnel saved many lives under impossible conditions. Their skills and dedication meant life instead of death for many young Americans. They show the best of our nation's healing tradition. Support personnel kept the war effort running smoothly. Without their steady work, frontline troops would not be able to work well. Their help proved just as needed as the combat role. The families who waited at home served too. They handled long separations, worried always, and gave emotional support through letters and prayers. Their strength gave deployed service members the will to keep going. Please welcome Mr. Cal Cohn, escorted by Kyle Roper.
Please welcome Mr. Cal Cohn, Vietnam War veteran. Cal is the son of Louis and Edith Cohn, and they lived in a small steel town called McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Cal's father was a steel worker, and his mother was a homemaker. Cal's father enlisted in the Army Air Corps and served in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Cal joined the Navy in June of 1965 at the age of 21. He attended Naval Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island, and was commissioned as an ensign in November 1965. At the age of 22, Cal found himself the officer in charge of a hydrographic sounding boat in rivers of the Mekong Delta. He and his crew were charting the rivers using French navigational charts that, in his words, were hopelessly outdated. The Me Too River is named after a strategically placed city in the Mekong Delta. The United States Navy needed control of this river to become the game warden of the waterway interdiction operations. Cal and his crew were deployed to this river. In an instant, Cal awareness, at the age of 22, that he was responsible for the lives of 9 sailors on his boat. While the boat crew were calibrating equipment using sea buoys, the boat started taking on water during rough seas. He called it green water, which is coastal water. The men were looking at Cal to tell them they were safe. As a leader, he assured his men that they would get through the rough waters. After this time in the war zone, Cal returned home and continued to serve in the U.S. Navy. He spent time as an instructor at the Navy Officer Candidate School. Cal retired as a Navy commander in 1991, serving a total of 26 years. After the military, Cal was an adjunct professor for the University of Phoenix, San Diego campus. He also was a platform speaker/trainer for an international seminar company. His specialty was leadership and organizational change. Cal met his lovely wife, Susan, along the way, and the couple had 2 children and 6 grandchildren. When asked to share something from his time in Vietnam and the war, Cal recalled his gunner's mate on board their boat had destroyed the .50 caliber machine gun by failing to check the head spacing on the barrel before firing, which made responding to VC ineffective. Another memory he shared was during Liberty in Hong Kong. Cal and crew bought massive amounts of stereo equipment at the China Fleet Club, as well as having tailor-made clothing made in 2 days from measuring to completion. It was so cheap, but by the time Cal had a use for his suits, let's just say they were a little tight. The interviewer asked Cal, how did you get the items to include the 4-foot tall stereo speakers back to the U.S.? Cal's response was, we had so much space in the front hull of the boat, everything made it back safe. It is our pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Cal Cohn home and thank him for his service and sacrifice to our country during the Vietnam War.
Mr. James M. Duncan, escorted by Trina McGee.
Please welcome Mr. James Duncan, a Vietnam veteran. Jim is the son of James and Shirley Duncan, and they lived in Kankakee, Illinois. Jim's father managed a variety store like the ones such as Ben Franklin or Woolworths. Jim followed his father's footsteps and joined the service. The difference was his father was a veteran of the Navy and served on a Navy destroyer in World War II. Jim enlisted for 4 years in the United States Marines at the age of 18 on the deferred program. He arrived at Camp Pendleton and completed basic training and infantry training regiment in 21 weeks. Jim arrived in Vietnam in July of 1968 and was assigned to the 27th Marine outside of Dang Nguyen. Some of his duties were driving a protection mule. This was a type of a jeep outfitted with a wide array of weapons such as the M60 and the M50 machine guns. When the unit had returned to the United States, Jim was transferred to the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, and was in the Northern 1 Corps area near DMZ. He spent his time in Vietnam moving from operation to operation. Jim spent many days on patrol from hilltop to hilltop. During Operation Dewey Canyon, his unit uncovered the largest cache of equipment belonging to the enemy. In March of 1969, during one of the battles, Jim was wounded and had to be medevaced out. The helicopter could not land to take the injured, so the injured were harnessed up to the helicopter. Jim recalled hearing the bullets from the enemy's guns going past him as he was being lifted up into the bird. After he was treated at a field hospital, Jim was transferred to a hospital ship. He finally made it back to the United States and continued to be treated at the Great Lakes Naval Hospital. Jim was eventually released back to Camp Pendleton and continued his service to his country and was finally honorably discharged in August of 1970. Jim went to where his family had settled in, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By the time he had returned home, his father had his own variety store known as Duncan's Variety. He married his wife Jody, and they had a son and a daughter. Jim joined the family business, and he and his brothers worked side by side with his parents to grow the business, and finally the brothers brought it from his parents in 1985 and continued running the business until retiring in 2006. Jim was asked to share something about his experience of the war. Jim shared a story about Christmas time in Vietnam. A chopper came in with hams and other goodies or a holiday meal. Because the heavy small arm fire, the chopper couldn't land. The helicopter crew dropped down the loaded cargo net of supplies. Unfortunately, the load hit away from the landing zone, bounced, and rolled down a hill. There was no way they could retrieve it. So much for Christmas dinner. Back to sea rations. It was one other story that he shared. Jim and his wife moved to Mexico in 2008. It was a little town. the Duncan Smith and another American couple. The husband of the other couple was a helicopter pilot in the Vietnam War, and they began sharing stories. Jim discovered that the man in front of him was one of the helicopters that was lifting Jim and his fellow Marines out of the battlefield that day that he was wounded. It is our pleasure to honor and welcome Mr. Jim Duncan home and thank him for his service and sacrifices to our country during the Vietnam War.
Mr. Fred Paul, escorted by Barry Crusade.
Please welcome Mr. Fred Paul, a Vietnam War veteran. Fred is the son of Earl and Catherine Paul, and they lived in Deerfield, Illinois. Fred's father was a corporate attorney, and his mother was a homemaker. Along with Fred, the couple had a daughter. Fred went into the Army after graduating from Carroll College in Waukesha, Wisconsin at the age of 22. The Army had plans for Fred, but Fred had other plans. He had enlisted into the Air Force, completed basic training and officer school training, and was commissioned in 1967. Fred's occupational specialty was weapons control officer. He was responsible for using radar and radio communications to guide and direct friendly fighter aircraft into positions so they could engage the enemy aircraft or their ground forces. His introduction to the Vietnam War was immediate, beginning to fly an EC-121 aircraft, first at Udon, Thailand, and then Da Nang, Vietnam. Eventually, the responsibility of Fred and the flight crew was ensuring 11 to 25 radar operators were able to complete the aerial intelligence gathering and conduct surveillance for Navy, Air Force, and Marine missions, and alert air crews about surface-to-air missiles. Fred continued to fly missions and had moved to Koh Hat, Thailand, and provided command and control missions over Laos and Cambodia. He flew over 1,000 hours during this time. Flight crews usually orbited a special flight plan to track both friendly and enemy locations throughout the Southeast Asia in 8-hour shifts. When Fred returned from Vietnam, he continued to serve in the Air Force, handling command and control management all over the world. He finally retired after 23 years in 1989. Using his business degree and economic degree from Carroll College, he entered the field of financial planning. Fred worked for numerous organizations throughout the Colorado Springs area. He retired from the hustle and bustle of the finance world in 2004. Fred began to volunteer part-time for his church as an accountant. He felt most fulfilled to volunteer with his church. Fred and his wife had 2 children. They were happily married until she passed away at the age of 31. Fred met his current wife, Georgia, at church. The 2 of them have been married for 19 years. Fred was asked to share something about the war. His first response made the interviewer smile. Fred was between the ages of 25 and 29 and serving in Southeast Asia. He had not married yet and found the environment extremely exciting. As a young man, the risks were great, but the accomplishment of our missions were exhilarating. Some of the airborne missions lasted 23 hours. While tiring, his crew felt they were helping the war effort. The challenging part was the loss of fellow soldiers, seamen, and airmen. Rarely a night passed after flying all day or night to return to the base and find we had lost several more of our comrades. It is our pleasure and honor to welcome Fred Paul home, thank him for his service and sacrifice to our country during the Vietnam War.
Mr. Donald Hamilton, escorted by Kendra Rensby.
Please welcome Mr. Donald Hamilton. He is the son of Morris and Beatrice Hamilton. Don was what we call an Army brat. His father served in the U.S. Army for 25 years. So Don traveled all over the world and within the United States during his younger years. Don entered the U.S. Army in July of 1968 through an ROTC program while attending St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. His chosen military occupational specialty was field artillery. After completion of his training, Don was shipped out to Vietnam in 1969. He was assigned to the 6th Battalion, 33rd Field Artillery at Dong Ha Combat Base. During the war, it was known as Camp Stillman or Camp Red Devil. In the later part of 1969, during Operation Keystone Cardinal, Don and his unit spent time at Pho Pai Combat Base. It was also known as Pho Pai Airfield. Don returned from Vietnam in late 1969 and continued to serve as field artillery officer with multiple assignments across the globe, just as his father did when he served. You can almost say, like father, like son. Don was married prior to entering the military. He and his wife, Marie Antoinette Hamilton, and their family began to grow with one son and 2 daughters. Don retired from the U.S. Army in November 1988. After retirement, he continued to train the new generation of soldiers on battlefield simulations and opposing forces training. He then moved into civil service role and retired from civil service in 2011. When Donald was asked to share something from his experience of the war, his words, heat, rain, it was never dry, and the humidity, living conditions in the rear and in the field, awful smells, fear, danger, death, and wounded soldiers on many occasions from the Viet Cong attacking artillery fire support bases. He told the interviewer about 2 locals who had worked on one of the base camps, Shik Camp Charlie and Camp Barber. They stopped showing up to the camp to perform their duties. Many men were curious to what had happened to them. Don stated he was in a meeting and was informed the 2 men were indeed the enemy known as Viet Cong, and were killed by troops from the 101st Airborne Division during an assault on the support base near Don's unit. Now as for Shik Can Charlie, the interviewer would like you to ask Don what duties he performed at the base camp. And if you're laughing out there, whisper to your neighbors what that duty was. Don smoked a lot of cigarettes, and C rations always had a 4-pack which was free, but they were $1.05 at the post exchange. Eventually he quit smoking. At the end of the interview, Don's words were, he is so very thankful he made it back, but many did not return. It is our pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Don Hamilton home and thank him for his service and sacrifice to our country during the Vietnam War.
Miss Joan Oristian, escorted by Christina.
Please welcome Miss Joan Oristian, a Vietnam War veteran. Joan is the daughter of John and Helen Cassidy. John was a career Army officer. Joan and her 7 brothers and sisters are what some in military circles called Army brats. It doesn't sound pretty, but these kids often experience frequent locations, exposure to different cultures, and many unique challenges associated with their parents' military service. Joan was fortunate to receive her education through the Walter Reed Army Institute of Nursing. As Joan was working on her nursing degree, she cared for amputees and severely ill patients. Joan received her college degree and had a 3-year commitment to serve in 1970. During those 3 years, Joan spent time at the Womack Army Hospital in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And near the end of her commitment, she worked at the U.S. Army Hospital located in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Joan met her husband early in her career. She introduced John Oristian to her father, and he was very excited. Not only did his daughter find love in a military man, but her father and future husband were both signal officers. Joan and her husband both served in Vietnam. When Joan arrived in Vietnam at the 18th Replacement Company, she was told she would be working in general nursing, supporting the medical surgeons. She was told she would be wearing nurse whites. The Army lieutenant did not go to Vietnam to wear nurse whites and made sure her point was known. The replacement staff told her if she didn't want to wear whites, she could find another nurse and swap duty assignments in the country. And so she did. Joan was assigned to the 67th Evacuation Hospital, Quang Nguyen, Republic of Vietnam. Along with the many soldiers Joan cared for, she would also go to villages and orphanages to care for South Vietnamese men and women and children. When Joan's tour was over, she headed back home to finish her commitment. After her time in the Army, Joan and her husband started a family and settled to being active in the military community as a military wife. While Joan was raising their 4 children, she continued to work part-time in hospital settings, taught childbirth classes at home, and helped in medical counseling roles. Eventually, Joan began working full-time in education as a health counselor in school settings.